Okay, I think we can get started if that's okay with you, Nick.
Sounds great.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Andrikovich. I'm Fallingwater's Senior Director and Curator of Education. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Between the City and the Forest with Nick Liadis. Fallingwater has been so fortunate to work with Nick for the last, I think, 7 or 8 years. And we first met him as an instructor for our high school residency programs, which are architecture studio based. And we're delighted to discover that his areas of expertise are not just architecture and design, but also ornithology. And he brought this really unique and much needed perspective to our students in the studio who are studying organic architecture and then able to think about this additional layer to um, sustainable design. So I'm going to read your biographies. I don't want to forget anything important, so bear with me. Nick Liadis is an avian conservation biologist based in Pittsburgh. His work takes him across the human landscape gradient into urban, suburban, and rural areas to better understand how birds coexist with humans. Trained as an architect, he became involved with bird conservation by studying bird window collisions. He founded a nonprofit called Bird Lab, dedicated to studying and implementing solutions for human-related sources of avian mortality, particularly within cities. So I'm going to hand it over to Nick Liadis now.
That was great. Thank you, Ashley. What an honor. Thank you to the whole Falling Water crew to be here today talking about my work. Um, I have a lot of connections to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. As Ashley mentioned, I come to the reserve as a bird scientist, but I also come as an architect and educator. So we'll just kind of get started here. I am both an architect and an avian conservation biologist, and I'm going to be talking today about my cross-disciplinary work and the multitude of things that I do that help combine architecture and bird science. It might be kind of a funny overlap thinking about it initially, but there are lots of ways that these two seemingly disparate disciplines come together. And the ultimate goal of this presentation is to show you all how to make better bird habitats, regardless of where you live. I'm very at home in both of these environments, right? So I'm juxtaposing the cityscape with Bear Run. This is a view from one of the terraces from Fallingwater. I'm very at home in both of these locations. In very expected ways, my architecture career was primarily focused in cities. I practiced for a long time in the city of Pittsburgh. And as my research with birds evolved and unfolded, I started spending more and more time out in the forest. There are a lot of birds even in cities, but a greater number of them, right, are in habitats like the one pictured to the right there in the Laurel Highlands. I also spent some time out just north of San Francisco in the Point Reyes National Seashore studying birds also. So I've covered a lot of ground, sort of had this bi-coastal experience. And one thing that really strikes me, even to this day, is that nature very, very simply is everywhere. And we can see this especially well with birds. Even if you weren't paying attention today, you're probably going to hear or see a bird at some point. And that is just an amazing kind of fact about birds. That at some point in the day you might hear something chirping or something flying over, and it for me it's that reminder that nature is present and that birds have found really interesting ways of coexisting alongside of us. And this is a wonderful quote by Annie Dillard, a really fantastic writer. Nature is often hidden, sometimes overcome, seldom extinguished. And that's going to be a theme throughout today's talk. Um, I've always been, as an architect and as a nature lover, I've always been interested in site-based architecture, right? Which is architecture that is connecting to its location in very powerful and meaningful ways. Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, is renowned for his ability to connect a building to its setting. Um, the image on the left here, one of my favorite spots at Fallingwater is Edgar Senior's terrace. Um, I'm taking this photograph at the back of the terrace. There's all this really amazing vegetation behind there, all kinds of ferns. I've documented salamanders back there, a number of butterflies and insects. So I really appreciate how the architecture really kind of comes into very close proximity with the natural world. The image to the right, creating this diptych, another Frank Lloyd Wright building, very close to Fallingwater. This is Kentuck Knob. And I just took this photograph a couple weeks ago when I was at Fallingwater teaching. And it's an eastern phoebe nest right on the column that supports the carport at Kentuck Knob. And so I love this image because it shows how birds can exist very closely to us and on our structures. Eastern phoebes aren't the only birds that nest on human-made structures, but there was really something magical about the location and the site of this nest right on the edge of a stone that I felt really kind of yeah, aligned with where this talk is going to be going today. Interestingly, um, here's a larger image view of that shot. Eastern phoebes are known for building nests on human-made structures. So perhaps some of you have even had this experience before. Robins are another bird that is very, very good at finding locations within our homes, particularly in cities and suburban areas, to nest. And I'm showing this slide because I have a friend who lives in Regent Square, a neighborhood in Pittsburgh, and he had a robin that kept trying to nest on top of one of the columns that supports his porch canopy, and the ledge wasn't really wide enough for the bird to be able to make the nest, but the robin was still trying, and so he helped her and built this beautiful, very quick DIY cantilevered uh, um, nesting platform, and she accepted it and built a nest. And what a delight that Steve was able to follow this bird's life cycle, breeding life cycle, right? The robin built the nest. He documented the eggs, the hatchlings, the nestlings, and then the birds eventually fledged. And there's an image of the robin with its youngster in his native plant garden. So again, really, really like beautiful ways, in my opinion, that nature showing how nature is coexisting within our built environment, regardless of where you might be located. Uh, just a little bit of history. I've always loved birds. And so people ask me, like, did my love of birds come after architecture school, during? It preceded architecture school by a long time. I'd always been fascinated by the natural world and birds, but I also like building and understanding how things get put together and built. And so I ended up going to architecture school. But I want to talk a little bit about my love of birds because it truly has been formative and has allowed me to create this kind of cross-disciplinary work between architecture and bird science. So I grew up in suburban Pittsburgh and became very familiar with the backyard birds in my location. These aren't videos from that time. These are sort of more recent videos that I've taken, but I just want to show you a little bit about, yeah, the backyard birds that one might find. So I remember very clearly a bird like a yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a bird that we typically only see in wintertime, late fall and early spring also in southwestern Pennsylvania. This is one in my backyard in Lawrenceville. Another bird that really captivated me was the American goldfinch. Um, and what captivated me especially about the American goldfinch was the fact that in wintertime they're very drab, olive and dull yellow. But males especially become very vibrant yellow in the springtime. And here's a small wintering American goldfinch feeding off of evening primrose seed pods, which I like to leave for birds. A few more, the ubiquitous common grackle. When they arrive, spring is right around the corner. Um, Beautiful black iridescent birds that form these really incredible flocks. I was just captivated by the way that these birds looked. They have yellow eyes, which made the appearance of like, something menacing. Uh, and then a downy woodpecker here, just kind of pecking away at a grapevine, probably looking for insects and small spiders, things that uh, might help it to survive the remaining winter that's left, even when food resources start dwindling. And so ultimately, why I think I was so drawn to birds was their ability to fly. It all sort of boiled down to that. I mean, I thought they were very beautiful. I loved watching them forage and interact with vegetation and the like. But like ultimately, that they could fly was the thing that really inspired me. And I'm going to show you a series of photographs by the artist Javi Bao, because for me, these images really kind of summarize the beauty of flight. Javi Bao's images are like a really beautiful kind of overlap between artistic expression and scientific exploration. So the feel of these is that they are sort of long exposure photographs, but really he's just taking a lot of frames and then overlapping them so that we can see the intricate patterns and invisible pathways that birds take as they're flying through space. I have a quote here by Jennifer Ackerman, a great female writer that writes a lot about birds. The gift of flight is a sublime adaptation, a way for birds to defy gravity and inhabit a realm where the boundaries of earth and sky blur into endless possibilities. Um, these photographs really kind of dial into that, right? We see birds flying, but it's sort of ephemeral, right? They fly past us, and then we don't really kind of see or understand that path. And these images sort of freeze that for us in a really incredible way. Here's a kind of a more zoomed out piece by Javi Bao showing flocking birds, creating those really intricate patterns. The little kind of dots that you see is sort of the frequency in which he takes those photographs, the stills that are kind of layered together to show us those trajectories. This one, probably European starlings flocking to a large tree in farmland, something that they often do. This is maybe several raptors. What I really love when you really kind of start looking at Javi Bao's images is that you can actually start to tell what birds might be shown in the photographs just by the way that the patterns exist. So when I see this image, I see maybe vultures or hawks riding thermals, just sort of warm columns of air, and they kind of like glide in a circular motion, which makes flight a lot easier for them. So you can see that in this image with the way that the trajectories are kind of curved and circular. Some kind of waterfowl taking off from the water surface and sort of beelining it across the water. And this one very expressive, maybe swallows. I'm not sure about this one actually, but obviously there's a lot of birds here and flying in kind of very erratic um, uh, patterns and trajectories. And birds are very good at not hitting each other. So this image kind of shows that. It'd be interesting to kind of zoom in and actually trace one individual's flight path in this kind of overall scene of many. Uh, the last one or two here. And so we're going to have kind of a stark pivot here. And for me, this is even sort of slightly emotional and difficult. And what I'm going to be talking about now is how vulnerable birds are when they interact with buildings and cities. And so we can love and appreciate birds flying, but very often birds fly into windows. And I'm going to get into a section of this presentation where we're going to be talking about window collisions. This is a female common yellowthroat that I had found outside of a familiar building. This is the Carnegie Museum, the courtyard. And what happens here is that birds try and find habitat to rest and to feed from as they're migrating. And in the case of this common yellowthroat, she most likely saw these really beautiful locust trees in the courtyard of the museum here and thought that she could reach those trees. But really, what she was looking at was the reflection of those trees in the glass. And so birds very often get tricked. We have so many cities and so many buildings across the United States that it's very likely that a bird is going to encounter a building or a lot of buildings on its migration. And unfortunately, this bird did. A very poignant image here showing folks in the background, probably not even aware that a bird had just died outside of the building. And you can see how, sort of, for a very small creature, this is a very disorienting scene. It's hard to really understand what's inside and outside. And the reality is that we also have a hard time navigating such expansive glass surfaces. If you look really closely, if you've been to this building, there's a little, so I guess I can't use my pointer, but if you look above this dad's back, there's a little white dot. Those white dots actually line the glass at the Carnegie Museum here. And that's to warn people like not to walk through it, that there's an invisible surface there. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can also signal to birds that there is a surface there also. That'll be a little bit later in the presentation. But I'm going to show a few more examples of collisions. Dr. Daniel Clem, is a researcher who's been trying to understand collisions for a very long time. He says, bird window collisions are among the leading human-associated threats to birds, yet they are often overlooked because of their invisibility to the public eye. Each collision represents a failure in our architectural design that demands urgent attention and action. So what I love about this quote is that Daniel Clem is addressing us all. We all have a role to play in creating better buildings and cities for birds. This is a Swainson's thrush that I found on a window that actually didn't have a lot of vegetation around it. This is a little building on Ellsworth Avenue in the Shadyside neighborhood of Pittsburgh. One spring morning during migration, again, it probably saw space reflected in the window. It was probably looking for a safe green space and struck this window. Scarlet tanager. So collisions can happen on any size window, any scale window. So they can happen on very large glass surfaces like that first image that I showed. They can happen on very small windows also. This could be anybody's kitchen window or picture window in a living room. The scarlet tanager hit a glass window here. What was most unfortunate about this scenario is that this adult male was actually feeding young, and those young probably didn't survive. They won't survive without their dad feeding them. So collisions sort of go, when you think of an individual bird, sort of it goes beyond that, right? Because ultimately this was a healthy breeding age bird who didn't get a chance to raise young. And so that can have a really big impact on bird populations. And then the last one here, if you actually pay attention, there are a lot of birds around on sidewalks and things like that. This was just on my walk to the grocery store, to Aldi in Shadyside, a mourning dove that struck these very reflective windows here. So it is a problem, but there are some exciting things out there that can help alleviate the problem. And before I go into those, There's been some revised research out there, just a little bit more doom and gloom here, and then we'll move on. Um, it's estimated now that over 1 billion with a B birds collide and die with windows in the United States annually. That's a lot of birds. And so the problem is much larger than we thought, um, and uh, and impacting populations in a way that maybe we didn't anticipate. 1/3 of all North American bird species need urgent conservation care. So that's a reason why we need to care about birds. We're going to lose a lot of these species if we don't act. It's just not windows that are driving declines in bird populations, but windows is up there. And a paper that came out a while ago showing us that 3 billion breeding age birds have been lost since the 1970s. So that means there are 3 billion fewer birds out in our ecosystems than there were 50 some years ago. Um, as an architect and as a bird person, scientist, bird lover, I get constant messages like this one of somebody in Hawaii who found my name and sent me a direct message about birds flying into his window. And I'm going to show some of the products and some of the technologies out there, which I recommended to this guy, but also that I'm going to show you that can help address the problem at a variety of different scales, from a small residential window all the way up to a larger commercial building. Um, my nonprofit Bird Lab was sort of was born out of a number of different questions that I was kind of asking at the time. But the collision question, how to design a bird-friendly building, was certainly one of the drivers for the creation of Bird Lab. And we implement all kinds of bird-focused conservation practices. We do a lot of education. We do a lot of research by way of bird banding, which I'm going to be talking about. And we do a lot of community science initiatives also. So here's sort of the problem. This is why birds fly into windows. This maybe shows it a little bit clearer because I'm focusing on the glass right now. So you can see here a building that has large, really reflective windows looking out over to the forest. And those reflections are like nearly perfectly clear, right? Like, if you were walking and there were large panes of glass reflecting this habitat, you might walk into that glass also. So the birds get tricked in scenarios like this. One of the best DIY do-it-yourself products that you can put on any kind of building, but this is especially great if you want to quickly put something out that has longevity and can cut down in a drastic way collisions. It's a product by a company called Feather Friendly. There are a number of other products out there that are very similar. The key with Feather Friendly is the density. So ultimately, when thinking out about a bird collision deterrent, you have to signal to the bird that there isn't an ecosystem or habitat reflected in this glass. You have to communicate that to them visually. And so these dots that get rolled over top of the glass help to communicate that. They're spaced at 2 inches apart because that is a tested density that is really good for all sizes of birds, even hummingbirds. It's important to put it on the outside of the glass, what we call layer 1. And this is a little installation video of me helping out some friends out in Butler County who are getting a lot of collisions on a very small window. And you'll see the reflection of the habitat in this window. And I was able to apply this product in 45 minutes. It works really great. It drastically cuts down on collisions, sometimes almost 100%, and it's pretty minimal visually also. So there's a little time-lapse video putting up some guides and then just rolling across this tape and then peeling it back, and it leaves a series of dots across the surface of the glass. That's all it takes. And you can see all of that habitat reflected in the bottom portion of the glass. That's exactly what the birds were seeing and why they were flying into this window. And there it is. And I'm going to show it to you from the inside. So from the inside, it's extremely minimal in terms of interrupting our view. I recognize we all love our views out into nature, but we need to help birds out also. And I feel like this is something that we can all do that has some visual presence, but very little. You can see here that your eye focuses past those little tiny dots. And in some cases, you might not even be able to see them at all. So again, a really fantastic product. Kind of something simple that you can do if you're like going to be buying new windows, purchasing or specing windows that have full length insect screens on the outside of the window helps tremendously. The birds might hit, but nothing's going to happen to them because it sort of functions like a little trampoline. So the insect screen is a great deterrent. They're not going to impact that hard, rigid surface, the glass. Here's another product or kind of style. This is Acopian bird savers, which is just simply a very basic system of hanging parachute cord that you can evenly space across your windows. This is very, very effective deterrent. A little bit more visually present than like the dots, but just another way of doing it. There's something about the three-dimensional aspect of this that birds can really kind of perceive. And you can see why collisions were probably happening or why they were happening on this glass. You can see all that reflected forest in them. And then kind of jumping up in scale, there are a lot of great commercial buildings. Both of these buildings were not designed to be bird safe, but they are because the architects here chose interesting architectural elements to put on the outside of the glass. And again, this was probably just for aesthetic reasons, but by their nature are preventing birds from seeing reflected habitat in the glass. And so thinking about bird safe design in this way is something that I like to teach the students that I teach at Fallingwater or at Carnegie Mellon, that a bird safe treatment, when you're conceiving of a building at the onset, you can think about bird safe design in really beautiful ways that can be incorporated into the language of the building also. So the image on the left, this is a residential apartment complex. These are actually shipping containers, but they have an exposed glass facade on the outside. And then the shading device on this building is on the outside of the building, not on the inside. So regardless of the orientation of those slats, the reflections of the street trees are not present, or they're interrupted enough where the collisions don't really happen. And then the image on the right, this is the San Francisco Federal Building by Morphosis. This building has glass on it, but there is this really beautiful architectural screen that kind of silhouettes the building structure behind it, a kind of idea or concept, visual concept that the architects were working with. And then another way for any architects out there who are looking and wanting to experiment with bird safe glass, this is channel glass, which has a sandblasted finish on it, which dulls down the reflections. It's not present on that kind of short facade, but again, this is a building that wasn't, if this was a true bird safe building, it'd be on the other facade also, the one with the clear glass. But generally, this product has a good amount of bird safety to it. And you can see the really beautiful effect that it has on the interior of the building, sort of glowing light, which you can also see at nighttime in the image at the left also. And what's really exciting, having been working with collisions a lot over the years, is that there's a lot of momentum behind this. We are getting the word out, and there's actually been some policy enactment that is forcing architects and developers to actually install bird-friendly glass on all buildings. Really great case study. Our example is New York City, which now requires bird-safe glass on all their buildings. I'm going to talk here a little bit about my teaching related to bird safety and bird collisions. I teach about this stuff. I'm going to show you some examples from a class that I taught at Carnegie Mellon last year. I'm going to be teaching this class again this fall, in a different section of the curriculum. I took our architecture students out for a birding adventure here. The Frick Environmental Center was a building that they had to make bird friendly. Frick Environmental Center has a lot of really beautiful open glass areas that overlook the forest, a recipe for collisions. I'm going to show you the work of one particular student who worked in that stair corridor off to the left of this image here, so where that woman is walking down. So you can see that there's a lot of glass there, a lot of vertical glass that's overlooking a lot of native plantings. And so the birds are attracted to those native plantings, and then they see the reflection of that habitat in the windows. So I had a student uh, who had designed an intervention here. And this was a class that I taught with Eddie Man Kim, who is currently at Cornell now. But here is an example of the students' work where they had come up with this kind of grid system at 2 inches, just like kind of the dots that we saw in the previous slide. So there's this grid system, and then these over top of the glass, and then these beautiful kind of smooth concrete um, kind of circular apertures that create a system that is attached to that grid from the outside. So you're getting a breakdown of the reflections, and you get this really beautiful light coming in that has shadow, a play of light and shadow. Um, the light is kind of sort of diffuse in some areas, so it has a really interesting effect on the interior of the building. Again, it's some images of it on the outside, a model, and a digital rendering of that to the right. And I mentioned I got to show the Phoebe nest again. I just loved it too much not to show it again. So here are my students at Fallingwater, teaching them about uh, the beautiful things at Kentuck Knob, and we had to spend some time looking at the Eastern Phoebe nest because the Eastern Phoebe found a stone that was kind of pushed out a lot more than the other stones, and sited its nest like just perfectly along that stone ledge. So a couple of examples of bird safe design that I've been able to do over the years. So I mentioned that these are all hypothetical projects. So I mentioned that I was at the Point Reyes Bird Observatory just north of San Francisco in California. I designed a system for the Point Reyes Bird Observatory building. You can see the issue here to the left. Reflective windows overlooking a lot of beautiful scrub habitat, coastal scrub habitat in California. Collisions are a problem here, and you can see they tried to put some decals up. Decals individually like that don't really do a whole lot because, as you can see, the birds are just going to probably fly around them because the habitat is still fairly reflective in it. And they don't look enough like a falcon that the songbirds are going to be deterred from colliding with the windows. So it's not an effective solution. The other thing that was a problem at this building, you can see in the image in the right, a lot of so this window system faces south, so it gets a lot of really intense sunlight. And it makes this kind of central space, which is a public space, not very usable because the glare is so intense and it really heats up. So it's a very uncomfortable space to work in. And so these are my two kind of, concepts that became questions, right? Like how to design a bird safe intervention here that could also deal with this issue of intense sunlight and solar heat gain. Here's an image of the outside. You can see those windows beyond this tree. A few of my sketches, just kind of looking at textures and patterns that could visually add something to the building facade. It's an otherwise very kind of ordinary looking beige building. So kind of maybe a secondary concept was how can there be something a little bit more defining for this building? And so what I ended up settling on was a system that sits outside of the window of these sort of panels of Corten steel and concrete. There's some signage there at the bottom with a series of movable panels that can rotate to help control the sun and the heat gain, but are also shielding the windows from the glass. You can see the glass kind of screened beyond the system and what it might be like to walk down that boardwalk now with that system outside of it. You can see here they're in an orientation that shades the glass completely. All right, so now I'm going to kind of transition. We're going to cover a lot of ground here today. I'm going to be showing a lot of different things. I'm going to be talking about the research that I'm doing with Bird Lab, different than the collision work. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our bird banding program. And so bird banding, for those of you who've maybe heard or who've never heard of this or never have seen this, is a way of collecting data directly from birds that can help us to understand how they use a given habitat or ecosystem. So bird banding involves setting up these very kind of long nets that are made out of thin black thread. Um, they're so thin that like you can barely see the net. And so that's why it's called a mist net. And it's strung up almost like a volleyball net. So the diagram off to the left there kind of shows that. They're really hard to photograph, which is why I don't have a good picture of one because they're sort of so thin. And you can see that there's like pockets or panels in the length of that net, and the birds kind of fall into the pockets. And then there's me off to the right there holding a northern cardinal, collecting some data from it. Um, and and here's a few images that kind of show that process. So the image to the left actually does have the mist net in it. If you look closely, you can see kind of something shimmery. That's the net. When a bird hits the net, it falls into those pockets. You can see the image on the bottom right there of a ruby crowned kinglet, just kind of like hanging in there. We have a lot of training as scientists to safely handle the birds when they end up in the nets and during the banding process. It's a federal program, so the nets are sort of and permits are under my name. And then we take the birds back to our little banding station, which is mobile. We don't have a building, so we have to set everything up and take everything down at the end of a banding day. And then the bands are in the top of the image here. They come in a multitude of sizes. Each species gets its own specific size. And then you can see a bird wearing a band. The gray cheek thrush to the right of those bands, I'm holding the leg and you can see the little tiny band on it that fits like a little bracelet. It's got a unique ID number. So if I or anyone else recaptures this bird, we have a much longer, deeper story about its life, where it might migrate, when it started breeding, how much fat it had on it, which is an indicator of migration. And again, we can kind of look at all of that data and connect it back to the health of an ecosystem. So the order of kind of some of the data points that we take, we identify the species, we try and figure out how old the bird is. We sort of do it more in terms of age cohorts instead of micro-aging the bird. So we try and figure out how old it is. We try and figure out the sex, if it's male, female, or unknown. Of course, with cardinals, it's very easy because males are bright red and females are kind of brown and red. But birds like Carolina wrens, which is pictured here, or chickadees or titmice, these are familiar backyard birds. The plumage is nearly the same across the sexes. So the only way that we can assign male or female to these birds is during the breeding season when they show breeding characteristics. Female birds, and again, we can only see this when we ban these birds. They have a brood patch. So during the nesting season, when eggs have been laid, female birds have to lose feathers on their belly in order for their skin, their body to have direct contact with the eggs. Otherwise, the eggs wouldn't be incubated. Feathers would insulate, right, and keep that heat in. And so they need to lose those feathers in order to have direct contact between their bodies and the eggs. So when a bird has a brood patch, when a songbird has a brood patch, like a Carolina wren, we know that it's a female. We look at fat reserves. This is particularly useful during migration because birds are sort of traveling these very incredible distances. Um, Carolina wrens, not so much. I mean, an incredible distance for a Carolina wren might be like, from one end of the block to the other. But a bird like the gray cheek thrush, which I showed in an earlier slide, they're going to go all the way down to South America. So they need a lot of fat to be able to do that. So we can visually score how much fat these birds have. And then we take some data that's kind of very similar to data that your doctor might take when you go in for a checkup. So we look for molting feathers. I know we don't have feathers, but we check for molting feathers on the bird. But we measure the length of the wing, which is an indicator of the bird's size. We take a tarsus length, which is measuring the length of the leg in the same way that your height might be measured. We weigh the bird, and then we take down any written observations about that bird in addition. So this is a bird. The image is a blackpoll warbler. The bird in this video is not a blackpoll warbler, but I'm showing this because blackpoll warblers are known for putting on a lot of fat that they need to migrate all the way down to South America with or on. And so this is a Swainson's thrush in the video below. And I'm going to play a video here, and I want you to look closely at the area in which I'm blowing on the bird. So you're going to see a yellow kind of a yellow zone. And that is fat. And then you're going to see the kind of pinkish maroon breast muscle around that. So the birds kind of start putting fat in their furricular hollow. And so this video is going to kind of show that. So you see that kind of yellow patch and some kind of pinkish maroon off to the side. That yellow area again is that big fat deposit, and it can amount to several grams, which is pretty incredible. And again, that's going to get a bird to where it needs to go. We're actually just coming in to fall migration. There isn't sort of like a hard day where fall migration starts, but we're approaching the end of summer and early fall. September is often the busiest month for migration, where the most number of species are on the move. And so we're going to be seeing in our banding research a lot of birds that are putting on fat because they're leaving our area. Maybe they were here breeding, maybe they were breeding further north and they're just passing through. Regardless, they're going to be eating a lot to put on that fat so that they can fly wherever they need to go. And in addition to taking data directly from the birds, we also look at what's happening in the ecosystem. So we measure the kind of timing of flowering plants when certain insects emerge, because that sort of completes the picture for us, or helps to complete the picture about how healthy an ecosystem might be. So here the cherry blossoms, the top left image, the cherry blossoms are in bloom. And number of butterflies. We always kind of monitor when the toad eggs are laid in the little ponds left over from snow melt. A monarch butterfly to the right here on a blazing star plant. So we look at a number of things happening in the ecosystem from a number of different systems in order to kind of complete this image of what a habitat is doing. And bird banding is just like really good outreach also. So we host school groups and families and individuals to come out and see bird banding. This is a very young budding ornithologist. He's also named Nick, and him and his family come to see bird banding every season. And he's been doing this for like 3 years now. So it's been pretty incredible to help guide him on his bird journey also. I'm showing him there. I do have a bird in the hand. That's a house wren. That was his lifer house wren, which means it's the first time he's ever seen a house wren. And then after we take that data and complete the banding process, all the birds get safely released back into their ecosystems. So very dramatic video here of a blue jay. And off it goes back to foraging or doing whatever it was doing. So a lot of our bird banding, I'm going to get into kind of some of the specifics of our bird banding project. The bulk of it happens in spring and fall because there are a lot of birds moving through the ecosystems here. A blue-winged warbler, like the one pictured here, breeds in our area. You can see in the map that orange zone is its breeding territory. Pennsylvania is right in the middle of it. The yellow is the zone it migrates through, and the blue is where it winters. So birds are definitely on the move in spring and fall, and that's why we do a lot of bird banding in that time. A little quote by Scott Wiedensaw: "To understand migration is to grasp the interconnectedness of the world as birds knit the globe together with their journeys, crossing borders and ecosystems in a way that transcends human-imposed boundaries." Our banding project at Bird Lab. So my architecture background coming into play a little bit here. We band in areas that not a lot of people bird band at. We have one of the few very urban focused banding projects. And so our banding project in spring and fall is looking at a gradient of spaces between the city and the forest. So our urban banding site is in Hayes Woods. Our suburban banding site is in Upper St. Clair in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, and our rural banding site is up north in Butler County. And you can see this gradient, right, really apparent in these Google Earth shots. So the rural, of course, having much better habitat, much more expansive habitat, being very green. The suburban image kind of showing the sort of distribution of green space to kind of house, more of like a 50-50 split. There are a lot of single family homes in suburban America, and that this image kind of shows that. And then the urban site, we have a lot more kind of concrete and urbanized area. And then Hayes Woods is that sort of green area next to the river, sort of a little island within the city of Pittsburgh. And some images of those sites. So Hayes Woods kind of really looks like a wilderness, even though it's right in the city. The suburban site, the forest in the background is where we band. There's lots of lawn, which is very typical in suburban areas around it, and our rural banding site with layers of different habitat. We've banded 74 species at Hayes Woods at our urban site, which is like astonishing. 65 at our suburban site and 68 at our rural site. So that distribution is really fascinating. The hypothesis here was that the city site wasn't going to be sort of as good habitat as one might find in, for example, the rural ecosystem. We know birds, songbirds, like end up in cities, but we don't know how well they're able to find food and what they're able to do in those ecosystems. So our banding project here is really looking at that. But we've documented a lot of species at that kind of urban green space. And then sort of transitioning from spring and fall, we do a summer work also. I'm going to kind of showcase our current work, Bird Lab's current work with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. Here is David Yaney from the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy's PA Natural Heritage Program. He's their avian ecologist, and we study Swainson's warblers at the Bear Run Nature Reserve. Swainson's warblers are a pretty interesting species of bird. We've documented last year the first occurrence of their breeding, at least that we know of, in Pennsylvania. So it's not very often a state gets a new breeding bird, and we were able to do this. So we go into the Bear Run Nature Reserve. Of course, Fallingwater is a part of this same ecosystem. We go into the thick of it. Rhododendron is in many areas in the Bear Run Nature Reserve is the dominant understory shrub, and it is thick and very impenetrable in a lot of areas. And that is where you would find Swainson's warblers. They are very shy, kind of receding birds, and they love to stay hidden in a thick understory of plants within a mature forest. So here is that sort of very disorienting thicket of rhododendron that they really love. A little video of it. I don't know how good the volume's not very good on the video, but that was a swain. If you heard a bird chirping, that was a or singing, that was a Swainson's warbler. Here's an example of our mist net. So we are banding Swainson's warblers to see if they're actually breeding. Because they're so shy, they're really hard to observe, and so we need to band them in order to see if they're actually breeding in this location. And they sure are. So here are two males that we banded in 2022. Um, then in 2023, we went back out in the summertime and we banded the first hatching year Swainson's warbler ever in the state of Pennsylvania, which is the official documentation that this species does, in fact, breed in the state of Pennsylvania. We don't know for how long they've been doing that, but this is the first evidence that they actually are. And then we did it again this year in 2024. So we're working on kind of showing that they might be established breeders in the state of Pennsylvania. This was this year's hatching year bird, a little slow motion video. There he goes back into the network of rhododendron and mountain laurel that characterizes the Bear Run Nature Reserve right along the stream there. Pretty incredible. So kind of wrapping up here, I've kind of given you a lot of information about collisions, about our banding project, and I want to talk a little bit about like what things you can do to help birds, and a quick kind of list of things that you can do to help birds on their migration or during the breeding season or during the wintering season. Protect your windows. If you're getting if you're getting collisions, that is sort of the like one of the easy fixes that you can do. Treat those windows with feather friendly. Curb light pollution. So birds migrate at night, and so our cities and our buildings emit a lot of light pollution, and it's very disorienting for them. So keeping your lights off at night, especially during migration, is something really important that you can do. An easy step. It saves energy also. Protect your cat and the birds. So mimicking a cat's play inside helps to keep them safe, and keeps the birds safe also. Otherwise, they're outside potentially nabbing birds, especially baby birds, but all birds can fall victim to outdoor cats. And then I'm going to highlight here reducing your lawn and planting native plants. So the last few slides here are going to be focused on that particular point. If you do all four of these things, like you're well on your way to creating a really bird-friendly yard or site or whatever, whatever, the location really doesn't matter here. Any building can or property can do these four things, and it's really good for the birds. We have a lot of lawn in the United States, particularly in suburbs. Lawn is not very biodiverse because it's pretty much only one plant growing. It requires a lot of maintenance by way of mowing and fertilizers. So you can reduce the amount of lawn that you mow by planting native plants in lieu of those sort of expanses of lawn. Here's a friend of mine, Lauren Nagoda, who bought a house in the North Hills, and she is actively reducing her lawn, planting it with natives. And the response by beneficial pollinators and birds has been like astronomical. What is a native plant? So a native plant is a plant that's part of the balance of nature and has a relationship to other living organisms within a given location or ecosystem. Very often that relationship has evolved over thousands of years. So this image has a lot of native plants in it. This is not a garden setting, but there are a lot of birds, which you can't see in this image, in this corner of this forest because there is a fruiting tree, native shrub called pokeweed, with lots of nice ripe purple berries. There's native sunflower in here, which pollinators love. Goldfinches love the seeds. There's milkweed. There are a total of 13 species in this image of plants. And it's that kind of mix of different types of plants, which is key to creating a native planting area around your house. I like to take inspiration from nature when I think about native plants. This is our rural study site in Butler County. And I'm going to break this image down a little bit. There's a forest layer, there's a shrub layer, and then there's this kind of meadow layer at this site. This is why we band here. It's because we have all those layers of habitat here, and the birds love it. And each one of those layers corresponds to a specific species. We catch scarlet tanagers in that forest layer. We catch chestnut-sided warblers in that shrubby layer. And then in that kind of herbaceous meadow area, we catch a lot of field sparrows. So if you want to attract and feed by way of these native plants, a lot of different types of birds, thinking in those layers is really important. The left here, we have a very kind of traditional suburban garden, doesn't have those layers. It's sort of nicely kept with a lot of non-native shrubs. The image on the right, I don't know what specific species are in there, but that's going to be infinitely better for birds because of the number of layers. There are plants at all different sizes, in different stages of flowering and going to seed, and that's really good habitat for birds. And you can see the connection between the image on the left, which was that image that had all those native plants in it, sort of being a little bit more wild, and connecting that to a garden like this, which also has a lot of similar elements to it. Leaving dead limbs. So if you have a tree that has had a few of the limbs die, if they're not going to fall on any sensitive areas, that's a really important thing you can do around your yard because woodpeckers will might nest in those dead limbs. They drill their nesting cavities, and then the following year you might have titmice or chickadees use those because they're secondary cavity nesters. So they will use abandoned woodpecker holes for their nest. They can't make their own, and so that's why they do this. Leaf litter, if you're thinking about native gardening and putting in more native plants or reducing your lawn, I like to use leaf litter as mulch because leaf litter has a lot of things in it that birds like to eat. And a lot of insects will winter in that leaf litter. So I could pretty much for hours watch a robin kind of like poking around in leaves looking for worms and things to eat. And then a few images of native gardens in the area. They can look really stunning. This is bird habitat in the city. This is what it can look like. So a variety of different species. Things come into bloom at different times. That's the beautiful thing about native gardening is that once one thing blooms, that another species will come into bloom and be at its prime. So you get this sort of handing off, like, one thing might bloom, the bloom is finished, they go to seed, the next thing comes into bloom. And so you have a nice kind of from week to week, something different happening. Same garden at a different point in the year. This is a lot of oranges and pinks. This is a lot of pinks and purples. The native garden that my friend Lauren planted. She's a photographer, and I'm going to show as we wrap up here a few of the things that she's photographed. Like from within a few weeks of planting native plants, she was noting things like pileated woodpeckers, rose-breasted grosbeaks, and Baltimore orioles in her yard. Blackpoll warbler, yellow warbler, brown creeper to the right, one of my favorite songbirds, a little tiny wintering bird here that looks like the bark because it's so perfectly camouflaged. You can barely even see it in the image if it wasn't for that white belly. And of course, native plants attract beneficial insects. A monarch on blazing star, bumblebee on, I believe, senna species. Um, and I'm forgetting the caterpillar here, but lots of good things will come, not just birds, and a few more images. With native gardening, you've got to embrace unpredictability. In conclusion here, because you're creating bird habitat by planting natives, things might pop up that you didn't plant, and that's really exciting. This is my yard in Lawrenceville. I have this retaining wall along my yard, and I didn't plant pokeweed, but this is a pokeweed uh, plant emerging from the kind of base of the foundation wall. A catbird probably ate a pokeweed berry somewhere like outside of my yard, and then came to my yard because they have really good habitat, pooped the berry out, and then the seed found a growing location, and here it is. And I love that that sort of unpredictability because in many ways it's what nature is about. Things kind of popping up in unexpected ways. And when you get a bird coming into your yard that you'd never seen before because you planted a particular kind of plant, it's really a magical experience. And these are the birds that will come if you do that. So creating bird-friendly yards ultimately uh, is, well, it's for these guys, and it's also for us to enjoy as well. So that's the end of the talk here. Thank you. Ashley, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. I'll say that again. Thanks so much, Nick, for that presentation. It was so inspiring to hear about your work with Bird Lab, which is really impressive. The exciting discovery that you made at Bear Run Nature Reserve, and then really inspiring to hear about all the ways that we can support bird life. So we have time maybe just for a couple of questions, and there are so many really great questions coming in, and I apologize if we do not get to your question. So just a few. I think I'll start with it's kind of a big picture question, which is how is climate change impacting bird ecosystems, which I'm sure could be a very long answer, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that is a big question. But very generally, like climate change is impacting bird life. Things are blooming and kind of coming into peak plant-wise at a time when birds might not be present to take advantage of it. So the timing of when certain insects emerge, when plants come into bloom, is changing, and bird migration is also changing, but those systems aren't changing together. And so it does impact when how quickly birds are able to breed during the summer months. It affects their migration timing. There's a lot of great work coming out of the Powdermill Nature Reserve, also in the Laurel Highlands, looking at the timing of migration and breeding. They have a much uh, they have a very large data set that is showing differences uh, between now and, let's say, like 30 or 40 years ago. So climate change is impacting things. So um, anything we can put into the ground that's going to help birds, any measure we can take to make their journeys easier is going to help them in the long run. So yes, climate change is a concern. Um, and again, that could be its own lecture, but yes, it is challenging birds in ways that we're kind of just now really kind of delving into.
yeah. So on a different topic, do you have suggestions on how someone without the ability to create a garden can support bird life?
Ooh, that's a really lovely question. So Bird Lab grows native plants that we are selling with Grow Pittsburgh. And because we're selling these native plants primarily in the city, we're getting a lot of questions from folks who have a similar question. They don't have green space and they want to know how they could help birds or plant native plants. There are some great native plants that do well in containers or in window boxes. If you have the ability to do that, that could be great. Um, Curbing light pollution. So if you live, for example, in an apartment building, if there's a way to get everyone on board to maybe shut their lights off from a particular point in the evening until the following day, um, to make sure that the light coming from that building isn't disorienting the birds. That could be a great initiative. Um, and like also just like helping to spread the word is another way in which you could help to promote healthier ecosystems wherever you're at. So a few quick ways to do that.
Great. There are different opinions about feeding birds. What do you think about that?
Yes, I'm okay with feeding birds, especially in the wintertime. But the thing with feeding birds is that you have to you have to clean your feeders. So if, for example, you have a tube feeder, which is the kind of plastic cylinder that has little perches and little openings, a very common bird feeder, you have to take that down once a week would be really, really great to empty out any food that's in there and to disinfect it. The recommendation is kind of bleach and water solution. Let the feeder sit in it and then rinse it out real good and then hang it again. Um, you could do a similar thing with hummingbird feeders and platform feeders, which I really like. Those are the kind of exposed platforms that birds can perch on. Um, and why you have to do that is because all the birds are coming to one plate, essentially, right? So it'd be like the equivalent of like, you know, 50 people eating off of the same plate, right? Germs are going to get spread. And that's what happens when feeders aren't cleaned. So feeding birds is a good thing, in my opinion, but you have to do your due diligence and clean your feeders.
Great. This is a really interesting question about your bird banding work. How
Mhm.
frequently do you catch the same bird?
Um, of course, it varies. So the Swainson's warbler that we banded in 2022, this was before we caught those baby Swainson's warblers and officially confirmed the breeding status in the state of Pennsylvania. So we caught him again this year. So birds have the incredible ability to navigate and to find very precise locations. So if they are breeding successfully, if they find suitable habitat, they will come back to that exact point year after year. So uh, we have a number of birds. So we're our project at the Bear Run Nature Reserve is still very new. And so we don't have a lot of data yet, but even this year, we've caught a handful of birds that we banded last year. So it's really incredible. And of course, the story that comes out of recatching a bird expands. Are they starting to breed at the same time? Are they um, yeah, are they using the habitat in the same way? Are we catching them at the same net location? So we can answer a lot of really interesting questions when we recatch these birds, and we certainly do. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you again, and I do have one more question for you. But first, I wanted to mention that this presentation has been recorded, and you can find it in a few days on Falling Water's YouTube channel. So if you go to fallingwater.org, and you'll be able to find the video of this presentation from there. But my last question for you, Nick, can you tell us where we can find more information about Bird Lab and how to support Bird Lab's work?
Yes, absolutely. So, birdlab.org is our website. We have a lot of great information up there about bird banding and some of the activities that we do. We have an Instagram page and a Facebook page by the same name, Bird Lab. You'll know it's us because of the watercolored feathers. That's our logo. It looks like, let me see if I can quickly go up to it. Uh, like that. And you can reach out. We are coming into fall migration. And so if you are a teacher or if you have kids or if you're just curious about birds yourself, we can set up a visit for you to observe bird banding as we come into fall migration. And I'm happy to answer questions outside of the video here. So
Great. Thanks again, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. This was an amazing presentation. So interesting.
absolutely. Thank you for having me and truly an honor and looking forward to better bird habitat.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining.
All right.